Hi, this is the video for Wednesday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day for 12th grade English. So today, we're still in this really abstract and difficult concept about advertising groups, advertising people. And today we're going to think about specifically white nationalism and Derek Black, who has a really interesting story about how he was brought up to believe that white nationalism was a good thing, and then he ended up leaving the movement. We're going to think about the ways that people are brought up. So I started with this song from South Pacific, You've Got to Be Carefully Taught. It's a song that I used to listen to as a kid because I loved this musical. And the gist of it is that the character sings, you've got to be carefully taught to hate all the people your relatives hate. And you've got to be taught before it's too late, before you're 6 or 7 or 8. So it starts young that we as people are growing up in our communities of knowledge and are taught certain good and certain bad beliefs. So the questions I asked are, what's the right way to teach kids? What facts should you teach your children? What facts shape your narratives? Beliefs shape your narratives? Who taught you these beliefs? So we're trying to take a more critical eye onto ourselves, all of us. And when I say community of knowledge, I mean every community you're in, including like the community of our nation, the community of our world. We just have to keep asking ourselves, what are my beliefs? And where did I get them? So as we turn to Derek Black, who was brought up in the white nationalist movement, we're asking, don't we all teach our kids what we think is right? And we do. I mean, you teach your children the things that you think are important to know about the world. And we all avoid teaching our kids to hate. So why then does conflict keep happening? Another question I have is, how do you know you're right? How do you know the beliefs that you have are the beliefs that you want to pass on? And that's the question that Derek Black kept having to ask himself. So we're going to skip past that. I'll show you an example of what I mean that fits into this idea of advertising something, advertising a whole group. This is a book, textbook from the 1950s in Virginia. So if you were a little kid growing up in the 1950s, like my parents, for example, or maybe your grandparents, the question is, what are the kids learning about slavery? And you can sort of see already what the angle might be here, because you have a picture that looks pretty happy. The central image here is of a slave master shaking the hand of his formerly enslaved person, who he's setting free at this moment with his family. So it seems, positive and light. And as we read the textbook, we realized that that's the way the textbook treats slavery. So remember, slavery ended officially, for sure, in 1865, but this is a textbook from the 1950s. So it's like 85 years later. And this is what it has to say about slavery. Early in Virginia's history, the General Assembly made laws closely controlling the Negroes, which is the word they used to describe people of African descent, or what we now say black people or African American people. This is a word that is really outdated and nobody uses it or should use it anymore. Many slave masters did not like to have the state government meddle in what they considered their private business. They managed their servants, notice right there, they call them servants, as if those people had a choice, as if they were earning wages, and not were enslaved for life. According to their methods, they knew the best way to control their slaves was to win their confidence and affection. It's already painting slavery to be something that seems like more of a personal decision. Then it goes on to say happy things about slavery. Many Negroes were taught to read and write. Many of them were allowed to meet in groups for preaching, for funerals, for singing and dancing. They went visiting at night, and sometimes there were guns and other weapons. The treatment of Virginia slaves depended on the character and the common sense of their masters. It cannot be denied that some slaves were treated badly, but most of them were treated with kindness. Public opinion in Virginia frowned on harsh masters. So, as I read this, I get a couple of things out of this. One, for young children, I think this is a 4th grade textbook, they're trying to sanitize or clean the image of slavery so that those 4th graders will not be hit with anything too jarring or difficult. But on the other hand, the second thing is they're really depicting slavery to be something that was sort of possible, or not that bad. As they say, most slaves were treated kindly. So they're trying to emphasize the idea that the institution had a kindness at its heart. Well, we know now this is not the way to talk about an institution that dehumanized and stripped all freedoms and rights away from millions of people. It doesn't do anyone any services to treat slavery as if it wasn't that bad. I mean, it's just not good. It's not a good way to teach children. But that's the way it was done in the 1950s. And it brought us into an interesting discussion about the fact that people are not overtly racist in 2021. Instead, it's this idea of advertising a group. Those people, or these people. Very few people are walking around saying, I hate this kind of person, I hate that kind of person. Overt racism. That does happen. More often, when we do it wrong, have really subtle things that help advance an agenda that isn't great. And that's everybody. I'm just using slavery as an example, and a powerful example of how an entire group of people is advertised. But as we learned last week when we wrote about when we judged other people, we're constantly doing this to each other. So we looked at the example, as I keep talking about, of Derek Black, and we looked at this video, which I can't play because of copyright. I'm going to read you little pieces of the article and then ask you to watch the statement video. Derek Black was brought up in the system of white nationalism, the movement, as they call it. White nationalism is what it sounds like. People who adhere to the movement believe that white people need their own nation. So, they're not saying, in this case, black people, or Jewish people, or Hispanic people, are lesser than white people. That would be overtly racist. Instead, white nationalists say they just deserve their own nations, and white people deserve our own nation, separate from everybody else. If we're separated, that is best. So white nationalism is where Derek Black kind of was grown. And here he is. He's in his early 30s now. I'm going to scroll down a little bit to the part where Derek steps to the lectern. Years before Donald Trump launched a presidential campaign based in part on politics of race and division, a group of avowed white nationalists is working to make his rise possible by pushing its ideology closer and closer to the conservative right. Many of the people at this conference have transformed over their careers from Klansmen, Ku Klux Klansmen, overt racists, to white supremacists, a little less overt, to self-described racial realists. But they're all doing the same thing, which is promoting the idea of a white nation. Derek Black, then 19 years old, represented another step in that evolution. He didn't use racial slurs. He didn't advocate violence or lawbreaking. He had won a Republican committee seat in Palm Beach, Florida, where Trump also had a home, without ever mentioning white nationalism. He talked instead about political correctness, affirmative action, and Hispanic immigration. So he's using these code words, or sometimes you might hear them called dog whistles, that are only heard at a certain frequency, to try to push his ideology into the mainstream. Derek Black was 19, and what happened, as you'll learn in the video, this is his dad, Donnie Black, is he went to college and he met people who had different beliefs than him. They were really gentle and thoughtful, befriending him. They weren't saying, "You're wrong, Derek. Everything you believe is wrong." They just slowly, gently discussed with him some of these ideas and their origins. And through that, and then through education, through learning about the history of the world, Derek slowly came to change his mind. This is a long article. If you choose to read it instead of watching an interview, then I'd ask you to go all the way down to the bottom, the section that talks about how he returned home after he had these realizations and was basically distanced from the family. His mom and sisters asked him not to come, and they didn't really want to talk to him. So he ends up changing his mind. He has to sacrifice a lot of his family ties. The interview here is 8 minutes. Like I said, click on it, watch it. It's really good. And then your STEM today is about him. Before he left the white nationalist movement, while he left the white nationalist movement,